I can't be the only person back in the day that thought the Scarecrow sections of the Arkham games were absolutely terrifying, like petrifying, to the point like I would have nightmares. Well, maybe not you guys. Maybe some of you are like, hey man, I didn't have nightmares. It wasn't scary at all. But for me, for your boy, it was terrifying. And I did a lot of watching, right? I had a big brother, so he would actually play most of these games, and I would watch him play the game. And as I would watch him play the game, I always thought to myself, this Scarecrow guy, I mean, he is absolutely creepy. At the end of the day, a regular scarecrow, like something for the farm to scare away crows or attract crows, they're scary in themselves. Like, I honestly think they are terrifying. So making a villain derived out of a scarecrow, it's something that I never thought I would fear so much, at least when I was younger. And I genuinely believe, from the bottom of my heart, that Scarecrow is Batman's most terrifying villain. But it's not just because he's scary and because he's terrifying that he is Batman's most terrifying villain. Now you might be thinking, that makes no sense. Like, what are you even talking about? Well, what I mean by that is, yes, he is the most terrifying in terms of a scary aspect, but I also believe that he is the most terrifying in terms of a threat as a villain. Yes, you have people like the Joker, the Penguin, and so on and so forth, stuff like Clayface, right? You have some of Batman's most crazy villains, Bane, who are terrifying in their own rights, and also just villain, like in terms of how high level of a villain they are, they're extremely high. And more specifically, the Joker, right? I think a lot of people will sit here and be like, no, Batman's most terrifying / scary / most threatening villain is the Joker. But in my opinion, Scarecrow, hands down, is the most terrifying villain Batman has. Now, I want to start with his name, okay? Johnthan Crane. I'm not going to lie, that just sounds scary. I know that's a little kind of like a weird little tidbit that I'm talking about, but he is absolutely terrifying. But what makes him the most terrifying in terms of scary and also the most terrifying in terms of threat? Well, for starters, let's talk about the fear toxin. This is Scarecrow's primary weapon, and his fear toxin is a potent gas that induces intense hallucinations. We've seen on multiple occasions that it made Batman fall straight on his butt. Straight up put Batman in an unpredictable situation where Batman could only rely so heavily on his extensive training, and it was he was still massively vulnerable, right? The fear toxin is all psychological. And there's a lot of times where people won't be able to resist or won't be able to overcome the fear toxin. At the end of the day, some people's darkest fears will hold them back from being the best version of themselves. And let's just say Johnthan Crane really holds on to that aspect, because that is where his true terror kind of lies, right? The fear toxin, the psychological trauma, and it's very effective, especially on someone like Batman. We see Batman as this dark knight, someone who seemingly has no fear, and on top of that, he really induces fear in criminals and crime itself. That's what Batman uses. He uses the darkness, he uses the shadows, and he uses fear. Batman truly uses fear to keep Gotham at bay. So when you have a villain who decides to use fear in their own way, and use fear in a way of a dark city that is covered and completely conquered by villainy, well, you get an insanely terrifying villain in a nutshell. And at the end of the day, psychological warfare is something that should not be taken lightly. Almost every single villain that Batman deals with is utilizing psychology, or at least this psychological warfare to some degree. I mean, we're talking about people like the Joker. He uses psychological warfare to a certain degree. Every single person that Batman comes across uses some sort of psychological warfare to actually get some sort of advantage, right? Now, this is totally different in the case of the Scarecrow, because he doesn't just use it to get an advantage. Scarecrow uses it as a way of fighting, as a way of stopping the Batman, as a way of shutting down everything. I mean, we have seen what Scarecrow's fear toxin could truly do, and yes, it can be overcome and can be conquered, but it's going to take willpower beyond measure to truly overcome those demons that are going to be presented to you. And they're all going to be presented to you, in an unpredictable hallucination. I mean, Scarecrow's fear toxin can make Batman and his victims experience their worst nightmares in just these vividly horrifying ways. We've seen Batman see, his long lost parents. We've seen Batman lose people that are close to him. Everything that lies within Batman, everything that is terrifying to him, everything that is basically the last little draw, everything that makes him feel like he's still human, everything that he still holds near and dear to his heart can be taken away, at least in the eyes of the Batman, right? And this really, really drives into Batman's guilt, where it can also amplify Batman's guilt drastically. Scarecrow often uses it to kind of induce fear and uses this as his power, right? To kind of get over on Batman, but really it kind of affects the existing feelings of guilt and responsibility that Batman already has, right? Something that Batman truly has to live with. Maybe he'll have to relive his greatest failures, doubts, or maybe the worst things he's ever seen in his life, like the death of his parents. And it's just a psychological threat that continuously will bury its head and will basically force you to just submit, and he doesn't even do a single thing to you. He personally is not inflicting pain on you. You are inflicting pain on yourself. That's what makes it so terrifying, right? It's this relentless mind game with literally yourself, with your subconscious, and you're fighting it. You're battling it. You're going toe to toe with literally the same person that you look in the mirror at, yourself. So you're fighting against whatever is happening within your body, whatever chemicals are mixing and flowing through your bloodstream, and you continue to fight. And even if you win, even if you conquer it, even if you get out, this will still drain you, weaken you, and make you feel like there's nothing else you can do. And frankly, the reliability of this type of kind of way of actually fighting, and this reliability of utilizing this chemical formula to be a villain, is kind of wild. Honestly, it's something that many people have thought about. Imagine how scary it would be if Scarecrow did flood maybe a water supply or something like that with fear toxin, or flooded Gotham with fear toxin, creating this giant city of people reliving their worst fears. I mean, for those Naruto lovers out there, we did get something relatively similar, but I know it's quite the opposite if you are a Naruto lover. And it's not necessarily a dream of fear, it's more of a dream of kind of enjoyment, which would be your infinite Tsukiyomi, which is what Madara wanted to invoke. Now, this is kind of that, but just on the opposite spectrum. This is the worst dreams, nightmares, the worst life you could ever live, all wrapped up in one. Not a beautiful paradise, whatever you love and hold dear, all stand beside you. And because there's argument to be made that people even say, well, infinite Tsukiyomi isn't really that bad when you put it into perspective. This, on the other hand, is quite the opposite. This is putting you in a catatonic state where you are reliving your worst fears, your worst nightmares, or your worst futures, all wrapped in one little dream, or at least in one little hallucination. You're feeling it all, you're seeing it all, and then eventually it could break you entirely. But what makes this guy, Scarecrow, someone who is human, someone who is just kind of like a normal dude? Yes, he is very smart, he is a doctor of some sorts, but what would make him different? What makes him a terrifying villain in the aspect of being a threat? Well, I want to talk about this because For starters, Batman himself has had quite a few run-ins with the Scarecrow. Of course, that is a main staple of the Batman character. And, well, what has Batman seen, right, hallucination-wise? He's seen many different things, and you could probably go through many, many different comic books, but the ones that probably would come into your head immediately would be the death of his parents, maybe the loss of Dick Grayson, maybe some losing or failing Jason Todd, or any of his failures, maybe even hallucinating that Gotham City is engulfed in flames, overrun by crime, and he sees himself unable to protect, well, the people there, right? He fails, the Batman fails, this version of Batman, he fails, right? He is no longer able to protect the citizens, no longer able to stop crime. Now, on top of that, maybe he even sees visions of him becoming more brutal. Maybe he becomes a murderous vigilante, a version of Batman who really crossed that line, who became the monster that is, well, seeing other monsters do horrible things as well. So he's just as bad as every other criminal. Now, we can talk about that. That is something that is very major. But what if you start adding other people? What if you start adding people of the Justice League? Well, we do see this in Injustice, which I always go back to Injustice, love Injustice, but we do see this in the Injustice 2 video game where Scarecrow uses his fear toxin on Wonder Woman, and Wonder Woman actually sees Superman kind of going against her, talking about how that she used him, that she basically turned him into a living weapon and now is using him to get exactly what she wants, and that's more or less domination over the entirety of the earth. And this is something that would make your eyebrows raise and your eyes widen, because it makes you realize how much of an effect Scarecrow could possibly have on every hero that ever exists. What are your deepest fears, right? And that's not a quote from Coach Carter necessarily, but that's the first thing that popped in my head when I said it right now. But in this reality, we are dealing with fear in terms of fear toxin. What are your deepest fears, right? What if we're dealing with someone like Superman? Maybe his deepest fear is losing control over his powers or failing to save the people he loves most, right? And we've seen it. What happens with Injustice Superman? Injustice Superman gets doused and, well, is utilized in a different and very terrifying way. Joker utilizes a different formula of the fear gas or the fear toxin, turning Superman into kind of this odd person, or at least turning him into what we eventually know as Injustice Superman. Now, it all started with this one day, with one fear toxin breath, with one ingestion of the fear toxin that is tampered by Joker, or tampered with by Joker, to lead him to think Doomsday is actually Lois, or no, excuse me, that Lois is actually Doomsday, and send her up into space, and that's all it took. Boom, it was over. Superman flipped the script and thought that he needed to conquer, take over, and control everything, stop all world wars, stop every single general, leader, whatever you can think of. That's what Superman felt like he needed to do, and that's what he ended up doing. Now, we even could go to someone like Wonder Woman. Maybe her deepest fear is the destruction of peace itself. Maybe her deepest fear is watching the Amazonians or Themyscira erupt into flames, and maybe her biggest fear is the failure to protect humanity in Themyscira, right? Maybe Wonder Woman would begin seeing Themyscira be destroyed, her Amazon sisters either, enslaved or taken off the face of the earth, or maybe the Amazonian sisters turn on her, right? Maybe it starts a global war. We even see this in something like Flashpoint Paradox, right? Imagine that. Imagine that's her worst fear, and she begins seeing that. She may even experience visions of, flat out failing to preserve peace, the main thing that she was there for, standing in a world that is completely covered and plunged into endless chaos and violence, right? That's also something that could genuinely occur, right? We are dealing with a Wonder Woman who's righteous, who is trying to protect, who wants to save people, but also a Wonder Woman who is a god that will fight to the very end. I mean, we even see this in a, I don't remember the show specifically, but she is fighting someone known as Cheetah, and she begins to actually get ingested or kind of injected with this kind of odd serum of some sorts, right? It's like a kind of like a fear toxin-esque poison that makes her hallucinate, and she begins to see a bunch of cheetahs, and her just innate biology will not allow her to stop fighting. So she was going to fight till the very end, until all the cheetahs were gone, until everybody was gone, and then once it was over, what was she gonna do? Well, we don't know, because there was a good chance that it was never going to be over, and that her heart would have exploded before she would even realize that these were not cheetah, right? That is one of Wonder Woman's like kind of innate flaws, was like this battle, non-stop battling type of thing. And let's just say if the fear toxin was ingested and she was put in a situation or scenario very similar to that once again, it could lead to the downfall of someone like Diana. Now, what about someone like Barry Allen or the Flash or Wally West, depending on which Flash we're talking about, right? I mean, I'm sure there's many different things that we could talk about with Barry. Maybe watching Iris, pass on or die, right? It's unable to save them. Maybe watching himself turn into the Reverse Flash themselves. Maybe Reverse Flash would kind of take over and destroy Central City or something along those lines, right? We can go down the list over and over and over again. All of these fear toxin, all of this like kind of idea with the fear toxin could lead to these massive heroes, from your Supermans, your Wonder Womans, your Flashes. Let's keep going. Aquaman, Cyborg, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter. All of these people, it could lead them to an absolute catastrophic end. Because imagine this. If he was able to develop the fear toxin further and further and further, and I know to a degree he did, right? There were a lot of different versions of the fear toxin, but imagine there was a different version of the fear toxin that allowed or forced these people to act on the things they see in real time. So the Flash believes that he's in crisis once again, and he has to run across the world to stop it. And he has to run across the world over and over and over again, so much so that it ends up destroying the planet entirely. Imagine Superman believes that Doomsday is there, and he has to fight Doomsday. And this battle would eventually destroy the entirety of multiple cities, maybe even Metropolis, maybe even the entire Earth. What about Wonder Woman? Maybe the fear toxin would force her to fight constantly, and unable to stop in her normal way, she would end up dying because of it. Imagine Aquaman. Aquaman thinks that everybody is against him in Atlantis, and he begins to hallucinate different things, and he begins to wipe out Atlantis because of it. All of these things could possibly happen because of one person, Johnthan Crane, the Scarecrow. Yeah, Scarecrow is a terrifying monster, terrifying being, not just for Batman, but for everybody else. And I'm sure you guys have suggestions for me to go check out and read with more Scarecrow stuff. And if you do, please let me know. Please let me know. Leave it down below. Be like, hey, go check out this Scarecrow comic or this one with the Scarecrow, right? Please send them my way. I would love to check them out. I would love to read them. But this is just what I think and my thoughts on why Scarecrow is hands down Batman's most terrifying villain ever. And it's not just because he's terrifying to Batman or even lethal to Batman, right? It's so much more than that. He is terrifying and lethal to so many other people because of the fear toxin he creates. And as always, though, I want you guys to make sure to leave a like and leave a sub, especially leave a comment down below, all that good stuff. And I don't have much else to say. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, And as always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out this one because YouTube thinks that you'll enjoy it. No harm in checking it out.